Okay, so you want to own a parking garage. It might be the laziest asset in this entire series. No tenants to chase. Nothing to sell. Nothing that spoils. A slab of concrete that collects money from people who park on it, whether you show up or not. Here's the strange part though. You are not really in the parking business. You are in the land business. And the cars are just paying the bills while the dirt underneath waits to become something more valuable, which is a wonderful position to be in. Right up until the day parking demand dies, and you discover that a parking garage is one of the hardest buildings on earth to turn into anything else. Let's start with the price, because the price tells you immediately what you're actually buying. A parking garage sits, almost by definition, in a place where land is expensive. That's the whole point. Nobody builds a multi-story concrete structure to store cars in a place where you could simply leave them on the grass. Garages exist precisely where the ground is too valuable to waste on a flat lot, which means every garage you have ever driven into is standing on some of the most expensive dirt in its city. And that gives you the first useful insight. When you buy a garage, the overwhelming majority of what you are paying for is the land. The structure on top of it is, in a strange way, the cheap part. Concrete, steel, ramps, lighting, a payment system. It's not nothing, but compared to a downtown parcel, it's close to a rounding error. Which is why building a new garage from scratch so rarely makes sense. Think about the arithmetic. To build one, you first buy expensive urban land, and then you spend a large amount per space on construction, and the cost per space escalates viciously depending on what you build. A flat surface lot is cheap, just asphalt and paint, but it wastes the land. A structure above ground costs many times more per space. And going underground, which is what you're forced into when land is truly scarce, is the most expensive of all. Because now you're excavating, waterproofing, ventilating, and pumping water out of a hole in the middle of a city. So you spend an enormous amount on the land, then an enormous amount on the concrete, and at the end of it, you have a place for people to leave a car for a few dollars an hour. That math usually doesn't work, which tells you something important, and we're going to come back to it. Most garages are not built because parking is a great business. They are built because somebody was required to build them, or because the land had nothing better to do yet. Hold that thought. It's the entire episode. But before we get to running one, there's a split in this industry you need to understand, because it explains who actually makes money here. Owning a garage and operating a garage are frequently two different businesses done by two different companies. There's the owner, who holds the land and the structure, and there's the parking operator, a specialist company that actually runs the thing. And the deal between them takes one of two shapes, and the shape tells you everything about who's carrying the risk. In a management agreement, the operator runs the garage for a fee, and all the revenue and all the risk flow back to the owner. If the garage does badly, the owner eats it. If it does brilliantly, the owner keeps it. In a lease, the operator pays the owner a fixed rent and keeps whatever they can earn above it. Now the owner has converted a volatile, weather-dependent, event-dependent business into a boring, predictable rent check, and the operator has taken on all the upside and all the downside. Which one you want depends entirely on what you believe about the future of parking, and that is not an abstract question anymore. An owner who signed a long fixed rent lease before the last few years looks extremely clever right now. An operator who signed one looks considerably less so, because they promised a fixed payment based on a level of demand that has since walked out of the building. For now, let's look at what it's like to actually run one, because this is where the charm of the asset becomes obvious. A parking garage is possibly the most passive real property business that exists. Think about what you don't have. You have no tenants, in the sense of leases and negotiations and co-tenancy clauses. You have no inventory. Nothing in your building spoils, expires, goes out of fashion, or has to be reordered. You have almost no staff. In a modern automated garage, you might have a gate, a camera, a payment kiosk, and a person who comes by periodically. You are not running a hotel with housekeeping, or a restaurant with a kitchen, or a marina with mechanics. You are running a hole that cars go into. And your costs, crucially, are both small and stubbornly fixed. Property taxes, insurance, lighting, a payment system, cleaning, and then the real one, the structural maintenance, because a concrete parking structure that lives outdoors in a climate with rain and ice and road salt does slowly degrade, and you have to seal it, repair it, and eventually deal with the deck. That's not trivial, but compare it to any other asset we've looked at. There is no water bill that could bankrupt you. There is no anchor tenant whose departure triggers a cascade. There is no crop that a frost can delete. It just sits there, and it takes money. Although that structural maintenance deserves a moment, because it's the one place this asset can genuinely hurt you, and it hurts in a specific and nasty way. Here's the mechanism. A parking deck is reinforced concrete, which means there is steel inside the concrete. In a cold climate, cars drive in covered in road salt, and that salt-laden slush drips off onto your deck all winter, every winter. Salt water works its way into the concrete, reaches the steel, and rusts it, and rusting steel expands. So, the steel inside your floor swells, and the concrete around it cracks and breaks apart from the inside out. Notice what that means. The damage is happening inside the structure, invisibly, for years, before anything shows on the surface. And by the time you see it, when the concrete starts flaking and spalling and you can see rusted rebar exposed in the ceiling of the level below, the repair is not cosmetic. It's structural, it's enormously expensive, and it may require closing levels of the garage while you do it, which means you are paying a fortune to fix a building that is simultaneously earning less because half of it is shut. So, the one true operating danger in this business is a previous owner who quietly skipped the ceiling and the deck repairs to make the cash flow look prettier before selling. You will not see that in the numbers. You will see it 3 winters later in the ceiling. So, how does the money actually come in? And here's where the elegance of this business shows up. Because a well-run garage is doing something genuinely clever with the same piece of concrete. The first layer is the monthly parker. This is the commuter, the office worker, the nearby resident, someone who pays a fixed monthly fee for the right to park there. And this is your foundation because it's contractual and predictable. It arrives in January. It arrives in the rain. It doesn't depend on whether anyone had a good time downtown last night. It's the closest thing this business has to a subscription. And a garage with a deep base of monthly contracts has genuinely bankable revenue. The second layer is the transient parker. Someone drives up, takes a ticket, stays for 2 hours, and pays an hourly rate. This is more volatile, more weather dependent, more dependent on whatever's happening in the neighborhood. But it's also priced far higher per hour than the monthly rate works out to. And now, the third layer, which is where the good operators separate themselves. Event and surge pricing. When there's a game, a concert, a convention, a festival, the garage near the venue can charge a flat rate for the evening. That would be absurd at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, and people will pay it happily because the alternative is circling the block for 40 minutes. Now, put those 3 together and look at what the very best operators are actually doing, because it's beautiful. Take one parking space, one rectangle of painted concrete. In the morning, at 8, a monthly commuter parks there and leaves it at 6. In the evening, at 7, someone going to a game pulls in and pays a premium event rate for 4 hours. And overnight, a person who lives in the neighborhood and has nowhere else to put their car pays to leave it there while they sleep. Same rectangle, same concrete, 3 completely different customers at 3 completely different prices in 24 hours, which reframes what you actually own. You are not renting out space. You are renting out hours. The space is just where the hours happen. And a great garage operator is doing something closer to what an airline does with a seat, or a hotel does with a room, which is selling the same physical unit repeatedly at different prices to different people based on time and demand. This is why the modern parking business has become surprisingly sophisticated with dynamic pricing, apps that let you reserve a spot, and yield management systems that would look familiar to anyone who's ever bought a plane ticket. And then there's a fourth category, all the things that aren't parking at all. Signage. because a large blank concrete wall facing a busy street is an advertising billboard, and you own it. Cell tower and antenna leases on the roof. Electric vehicle charging, which is increasingly a genuine revenue line and not just an amenity. Valet operations. Film shoots, because an empty concrete garage is a location scout's dream. And on many urban garages, the ground floor is not parking at all, but a liner of retail shops facing the street because the street frontage is far too valuable to waste on a blank wall and a ramp. So stack it all up. A predictable contractual base, a higher-priced transient layer, surge pricing on top of that, and a set of ancillary streams from an asset that requires almost no labor, has no inventory, and cannot spoil. That is, on paper, a genuinely lovely business. So why did I say the math on building one usually doesn't work? And why are sophisticated investors quietly selling? Here's where we have to talk about the thing that has propped up this entire industry for the better part of a century, and that almost nobody outside of urban planning has ever heard of. Parking minimums. For decades, in city after city, the law said this: if you want to build a thing, you must also build parking for it. So many spaces per apartment. So many per 1,000 square feet of office. So many per restaurant seat. And these requirements were often generous, sometimes wildly so, designed around the assumption that everyone drives everywhere, always. Now think about what that rule actually did economically. It manufactured demand for parking by force of law. Developers who did not want to build parking and whose customers might not have wanted to pay for parking were legally compelled to build it anyway. And in dense areas where they couldn't fit it on their own site, they had to lease it or buy it from someone nearby. From a garage owner. From you. So for a very long time, the value of every parking garage in a city was quietly underwritten by a legal requirement that had nothing to do with whether people actually wanted to park. It wasn't market demand. It was mandated demand. And it made owning a garage far, far more valuable than the actual desire for parking would ever have justified on its own. And there's a second, subtler gift hidden inside those rules, which is that they made parking feel free. Because once a developer is forced to build the parking, the cost of that parking doesn't disappear. It gets buried. It goes into the rent of the apartment, whether or not the tenant owns a car. It goes into the price of the groceries at the supermarket with the enormous free lot. It goes into the lease of the office. Everybody pays for the parking, and almost nobody pays for it directly, which means the true cost of storing a car in a city has been hidden from the person storing the car for about 70 years. That matters enormously to you as a garage owner because it shaped an entire culture's expectations. People drive into a city expecting to find somewhere to put the car and expecting it to be cheap, because for their whole lives, it has been quietly subsidized by everything else they buy. Your business has been sitting inside that subsidy, benefiting from a world that was legally required to assume everyone drives. Now, here's the part that should make any garage owner sit up. That rule is being deleted. City after city, around the world, has been abolishing or dramatically reducing parking minimums because planners concluded they made housing more expensive, cities uglier, and traffic worse. And when a city repeals its parking minimums, it is, in a single stroke, removing the invisible law that was propping up demand for every parking space in town. That's the paragraph. That's the quiet deletion that changes the value of your asset, and it happened at a council meeting you probably didn't attend. And it's arriving at exactly the worst possible moment because two other things have hit this business at once. The first is that a meaningful share of the commuters simply stopped coming. When a large portion of office workers shifted to working from home some or all of the week. The monthly contract parker, the reliable, contractual, bankable foundation of the garage business, evaporated in part, not entirely. But a garage that was full 5 days a week and is now full 2 or 3 has lost a chunk of its most predictable income permanently, and no amount of good management brings that person back because they are working in their kitchen. The second is that the drive downtown and park trip itself has been partially replaced. Ride-hailing means a large number of people who would once have driven into the city and park now simply do not have a car with them when they arrive. Every one of those trips is a parking transaction that never happens. So look at the pressure. Mandated demand is being repealed. Commuter demand has structurally shrunk, and the trip that generated transient demand is being substituted away. Three forces, all pushing the same direction at the same time. And there's a fourth one sitting on the horizon, further out and less certain, but worth naming because it's the one that would finish the job. If vehicles ever genuinely drive themselves, the logic of parking changes completely. A car that can drop you at the door and then go somewhere else, or simply go and serve another passenger, does not need to be stored at expensive downtown prices at all. The entire reason a parking garage exists in the most valuable part of a city is that a human being had to leave the car near where the human being was going. Remove that constraint, and the car can be stored anywhere cheap, miles away, in a place where land costs nothing. Nobody knows the timeline on that, and plenty of people have been confidently wrong about it. But notice the asymmetry. Almost every plausible version of the future involves less demand to store a car on expensive urban land, not more. It's very hard to construct a story where parking demand in a city center goes up from here. And when you are buying a long-lived concrete structure, with a single possible use, the direction of the trend matters more than its speed. And now, the trapdoor, which is the part that turns a difficult situation into a genuinely dangerous one. Ask yourself the question every garage owner should be asking. If parking demand keeps falling, what is this building worth? And the answer, unlike almost every other asset in this series, is horrifying. Because a parking garage is one of the hardest structures on Earth to convert into anything else. Think about what it physically is. The floors are sloped because cars have to drive up them. The ceilings are low because a car doesn't need headroom, and floor-to-floor heights in a garage are often far below what a habitable building requires. There's very little plumbing because cars don't use bathrooms. The ventilation is designed to move exhaust, not to condition air for people. The structural grid is laid out for parking bays, not rooms. There are no windows where a person would want windows. So when someone says, just turn it into apartments, understand what that actually requires. You need to level the floors or replace them. You need to raise the ceilings, which often means removing floors entirely, which means the building holds fewer levels than it did. You need to add plumbing risers through a concrete structure that was never designed to accept them. You need to punch windows into a facade. In many cases, by the time you have done all of that, you have spent more than it would have cost to demolish the thing and build fresh, and you have ended up with a compromised building that is worse than a purpose-built one, which produces the single strangest fact in this entire business. And it's worth stating plainly. The building can be worth less than nothing. The land is worth a fortune. But sitting on top of that land is a heavily reinforced concrete structure that serves no purpose other than parking, that cannot be economically converted, and that costs real money to demolish. So the value of the parcel is the value of the land minus the cost of getting rid of the building on it. The garage, the very thing you bought, is a liability standing on the asset, and that is the trapdoor. Not that your revenue declines. Revenue declines everywhere. It's that in this business, when the revenue goes, you cannot pivot the building into something else, and you cannot easily clear it either. You are stuck holding a concrete box that only has one use in a world that is slowly deciding it doesn't need that use. So let's answer the question we opened with. What do you actually own when you own a parking garage? You own a piece of urban land that has been temporarily assigned a low-value use, and a stream of cars that are, in effect, paying the property taxes and the holding costs while that land waits for its real destiny. That's the honest structure of it. The garage isn't the asset. The garage is the placeholder. It is the thing occupying the land, generating just enough income to justify not doing anything else with it yet, until the day the numbers finally say that something better should be built here. And this is precisely why so many garages sit for decades on parcels that are visibly too valuable to be storing cars. It isn't neglect, and it isn't stupidity. It's patience. Somebody is holding land in the middle of a growing city, and rather than paying to hold it out of their own pocket, they've arranged for thousands of strangers to pay the carrying cost on their behalf, a few dollars at a time, which means the entire business is a bet with two clocks running against each other. On one clock, the land under you appreciates as the city grows. On the other, the parking revenue that pays you to hold it is being eroded by remote work, by ride hailing, and by the repeal of the laws that manufactured your demand. And the whole game, the only game, is whether the land becomes worth developing before the parking stops paying enough to hold it. Get that timing right. And you are a genius who bought a city block and had commuters fund the purchase. Get it wrong. And you're the owner of an obsolete concrete structure that nobody wants, that nobody can reuse, and that you have to pay to remove. So, should you buy one? Here's the honest split. The optimistic version goes like this. You buy a garage in a dense, growing city, near venues, that generate genuine event demand in a neighborhood where residential density is rising and people still need somewhere to put a car overnight. You run it well, with dynamic pricing, a deep base of monthly contracts, EV charging, billboards on the walls, and retail on the ground floor. It throws off steady, low-effort cash. And underneath it all, the land keeps climbing. And one day, a developer looks at that parcel and offers you a number that has nothing to do with parking at all. The cars paid for the wait. The land paid for everything else. The harder version looks like this. You buy a garage in a downtown that has quietly stopped filling up. Your monthly contracts thin out as the office is half empty. The city repeals its parking minimums, and the mandated demand disappears. Transient volumes fall as people take a ride instead of a car. And you look at your falling revenue and think, fine, I'll convert it. And then you get the number back from the architect, and you discover the ceilings are too low, the floors are sloped, and the cheapest path forward is demolition, which you have to pay for. Now you're not sitting on a great land bet. You're sitting on an expensive concrete problem that is generating less every year. And notice what decides between those two futures. Almost none of it is how well you run the garage. You can price it perfectly, keep it spotless, fill every hour of every day, and still lose because the thing that determines your fate was decided in a council chamber and in a million private decisions about whether to come into the office at all. Because in the end, a parking garage isn't a business that owns land. It's land that happens to be wearing a business, and the cars are just feeding the meter while it waits.